Bob, welcome back to the Bitcoin Infinity Show. Great to have you here.
Hey, Knut, always great to see you.
Yeah, likewise. We were talking about just now before we started rolling the cameras, and you had a story to tell, so please do.
Yeah, well, let's dive right in. Well, I was very fortunate early in life. I think, as you know, I was part of the early personal computer days, and I was working for a company called Gateway, where I eventually became the chief technical officer there. But I'd been part of taking the company public, and there was a point where I had been there for 13 years. I had done well financially, and I was a little fried, honestly. It had been a long run. So I retired. I was 35 years old, and I thought that's what you were supposed to do. Like you get a certain amount of money and you think you don't need to work anymore, so you retire. And so I did. And I got 60 days in. I can tell you the exact date I did that, by the way, which was June 15th of the year 2000 was the exact day of my retirement. And I know that because the next day, June 16th, was my birthday. I turned 36. So I thought, well, it wouldn't be cool to be 35 and retired, right? It's actually a very immature thing to think about. Like that was, to have that sort of very fiat thing as a goal. But anyway, I did that. And my kids were all younger then, all grade schoolish age. And so I had a great 60 days where we went on vacations and we did all kinds of, really fun things. And then they went back to school and I was staring at a computer screen wondering what the hell am I going to do now? I realized I had nothing, complete emptiness. And I realized the fallacy of retirement. It was a completely stupid concept. And I started searching for what to do. I actually started a beer company, what I did. And then ended up 6 months later, there were some problems at Gateway. They asked me to come back and I did another 4 years there. But the life lesson was I realized I will never retire. I turned 61 in a little bit here. I'll never retire, but I love working, so I think the goal is to acquire financial independence. That's the goal, to do what you feel you enjoy the most and you provide the most value. And you were talking about, being absorbed in the creative process and the writing process of your book. And that's what it's all about, just having that freedom to do that. And I also say, this is just my hypothesis, but I believe that I've seen so many people retire, let's say in their 60 years old or 65 years old, and then they die shortly after. It's such a common thing. And I've talked to several medical doctors about it. And one of my friends who's a cardiologist said, yeah, we see right in that age group of retired people, we often see these certain proteins in the bloodstream spike. They're heavy contributors to stroke and heart disease and those sorts of things. And then I started thinking about that and I realized, biologically, it actually makes sense that if you retire, that you should be taken out. Like you become a net consumer of resources. And so in 5,000 years ago, there was no room for somebody to retire, right? If you could no longer contribute, if you weren't contributing, then you get taken out.
Not to mention 200,000 years ago. This must have been true for all of evolutionary history. I believe from the first amoeba, if you don't have a purpose, off of the survival of the tribe.
Yeah. And I think part of it comes from within too. Do you have a sense of purpose? Do you feel you are contributing? That's the trigger point. Because I think whether you're contributing or you're leeching.
Yeah,
But this is
you can't fake that to yourself, I guess.
Right, right.
You can't lie to yourself about it.
Yeah, that honesty. And it's also, again, purely at my hypothesis with no substantiation. But I would speculate that the reason that women live longer than men is that they maintain their sense of purpose longer on average. Because if you look at what a grandmother does, let's say within the family structure, like usually very active, raising the kids and cooking and being a very active part of the family and the community structure. But men have a tendency to go do something more leisurely or less constructive and involved with the rest of the community. So like I said, I can't substantiate that, but it makes sense to me.
I mean, this resonates so deeply with me because my father was always terrified of retiring because of this very reason. Like, he also had a bunch of friends that just went off and died as soon as they retired. Like, within the year or two, they were dead. And I think, like, it's hard. It's sort of a chicken in the egg thing because you don't know if it's the way you view yourself and your own sense of purpose, or that it's actually made evolutionary sense for women to live longer because of this very thing. Because, like, we are there to hunt the mammoth. They are there to produce the mammoth salad for lunch. Like, so that is already in a way a net loss in terms of economic resources, but it's a net gain in terms of social structure for the flock, I guess. So their purpose doesn't change that much with the event of, like, you're not able to hunt mammoth anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So from that perspective, it also makes perfect sense why we should live shorter.
Well, it's interesting to bring it back to some of the things we usually talk about, but you're right. If we look at it in an economic sense, that in these social structures without money, like, money makes no sense within a family structure, right?
No, because you all know one another, which is also, by the way, why KYC makes absolutely no sense. Because if you know the people, you don't need money.
Exactly right. So, but that doesn't mean there's not some sort of a chart of accounts in a way, right? But it's probably kept internally. Am I useful or not? Because if you love your family and you love your community, the point at which you are a net consumer instead of a net producer is probably the point where you say, well, I gotta remove myself from this structure because it needs to go on. And
yeah, I think this runs so deep. I think it's why people on welfare are often more depressed and all sorts of other adjacents. Like, I believe that even, like, people in the public sector don't live as long because of this thing. There might be other factors that make the average kind of similar, because I think more entrepreneurial people are more willing to take risks, to take on risk. So therefore, their average lifespan may be lower anyway, not because they died of depression early, but because they died in some freak accident because they took on risk. So the averages may level out, but still, I think it's probably dangerous for a guy to stop working too early, and I think it's way more dangerous with men than with women, as you say. And I know that there's some data suggesting, like, there was, like, I don't remember the name of the study, but it was a study done over like 40, 50 years, one of the longest running studies in like health research ever, where they found out that the biggest contributor to whether you live long or not has nothing to do with smoking alcohol or red meat or whatever of this other stuff that they claim is so dangerous, being out in the sun and stuff. But it totally has to do with social context. That's the biggest factor of all. Like, if you're alone, you die earlier. And that, for many men in particular, since men, like, half of the men never marry, like, or never have a life partner. So for men, for 50% of the men, work is super important from just the social context, because that makes your life important to other people. That's why you keep on living. And as I said, like, whether it's because you feel a certain way or whether that's just nature doing its thing and making sure that productive people survive, I have no clue. But there's certainly a truth there.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And by the way, I think that the concept of retirement is kind of, if you look at it, you'll find it's a very modern concept. It's, I've done a little bit of research on it, and it looks like it's, probably in the late 1800s is where that concept first came about. And it came about in Western Europe, a lot of it in like Germany, where what they had economies that were suffering, and they had a lot of population growth. So they had a lot of young people coming up, and they were trying to kind of push some of the older people to retire to keep the young people from being too disgruntled, that they couldn't provide economic opportunity unless there was, unless they took some of the older people out of the workforce. And so you either need wars to cull the population, or you have to force them to retire.
Sounds an awful lot like the birth of statism to me, and collectivism in general. Like,
yes,
you have to sacrifice this for the good of the rest of the people.
Yes.
No, it's ridiculous. Like I told you just before we started recording here, now I'm spilling the beans on this, but I'm so fascinated by this idea. I'm reworking my praxeology book, and I'm adding a couple of chapters just to make it into 21 chapters in total, because
nice.
Right now it's 18 and has no mimetic power. Anyway, so I struggled with figuring out what the last but one chapter should be. Like, chapter 21 is still the conclusion. But I figured out that the Shawshank Redemption, the movie, that's the analogy, because, like, for the last chapter. And I'd like to pick your brain on this, because this is so adjacent to what we were just talking about. So in the movie, the protagonist is called Andy Dufresne. And he befriends Morgan Freeman, who also narrates the movie, and his character is called Red. It's the color of communism. Anyway, and there's also a third character called Brock, I believe, who is an older guy working in the library. And this Brock guy gets set free, but he's institutionalized. So all he finds on the outside is fear, and he hangs himself, takes his own life, because he can't handle the fear. Because to him, being imprisoned and provide, he's been there so long, so that the prison itself provides him with a sense of security. He's not going to die in there. He's going to be fed every day. It's a miserable life, but it's the only one he knows. So he lets fear dictate his actions. So that's the lesson there. And then you have Red in the beginning of the movie, Morgan Freeman's character, warning Tim Robbins' character, Andy, about hope. That hope is a dangerous thing, because it will lead to disappointment and depression. And the basic premise of the movie, or what the movie is actually about, is that hope is always the right choice, because you're going to die anyway. So you can't escape that.
Yeah.
So you might as well live as if there is hope. And it's a very beautiful message. And what's the idea that struck me is, like, this is about time preference. This is why Bitcoin is hope, by the way. And, like, this is exactly what it's about. Andy has a super low time preference. While he's doing all the other crap and trying to get a career inside the prison and befriend the warden to get out that way, he finds out later that he couldn't, because the warden is a crook and he just uses him. But meanwhile, he's been low time preferencing the fuck out of the prison walls by digging a tunnel with a very small. You remember that?
I remember that. Yes.
Yeah. And he instills hope in his peers, like into Red, who Red is also institutionalized, but he has learned from Andy and seeing him dig the tunnel, that hope is worth something, that hope is worth fighting for. And it's so deep. Like when you start to see this as a, like, that there's a libertarian truth there, that like anyone who says, what about the roads, is not actually asking about the roads. They're admitting that they're suffering from Stockholm syndrome, and that they think that forceful interactions are necessary for human beings to cooperate. They have been so used to the whip rather than the carrot, so that they don't admit that the carrot exists. They don't admit that it's much better to, like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to live life on my terms. I'm going to take back the driver's seat. I'm going to die anyway. So I might as well fill my fucking life with some sense of purpose. And I'm just still high on like finding that idea, that the analogy there. So that's what. So I'd love to pick your brain on that, since we're talking about similar things.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's a phenomenal analogy and way of illustrating this life lesson. It goes well beyond Bitcoin and money. It's about life. That's what we were talking about here before. I'm struck. I just wrote a tweet the other day that I think illustrates a little bit of this same syndrome. So when I was a young man, my father and my grandfather worked for, it was a company. It was called American Brass, and so it was a brass mill. My father was an accountant. My grandfather ran the supply room. It was a big facility. And when I was in college, just got out of high school, and I needed to earn money for college, I got a job in the brass mill. And I had to join the United Steelworkers of America to get the job. I had to join a union, yeah. And this is like, for you coming from Europe, you may know, but it was like the epitome of unions. United Steelworkers of America and the automotive workers, like they were the most corrupt, the worst of the worst.
Oh, I know about corrupt unions. Sweden was entirely run by corrupt unions for a very long time. The biggest union for industrial workers was, you automatically joined the Social Democratic Party when you joined the union for like 30 years. Like, it was so intertwined with the entire system. It was ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, I got this position, which I would have worked there in 83, 84, and 85, by the way. Those would have been the years. And I was making $15 an hour, by the way, then. I knew nothing, by the way. Like, think about how much money that was 40 years ago. It's probably the equivalent of making like 40 and more. And I said, my father worked in accounting, and my grandfather ran the supply room. They were both considered part of management. They were not in the union, but I had to join the union as a worker. But those are the two most important men in my life, and the last thing I wanted to do was let them down, right? So I got the job, and I worked my ass off. I ran an incinerator, this massive incinerator. It was about 6 meters long, about 4 meters high, big cylindrical thing, and I would burn stuff all day long in this incinerator, and I would come out looking like I was in blackface. The soot, sweating like crazy. I worked really hard, and I'd drive this little forklift around, picking up different pieces that needed to go into the incinerator. So I'm running the incinerator, and I'm first week or so, I work my ass. I'm just working so hard, like, because I was making a lot of money. I felt like, wow, this is an amazing thing. But the most important thing for me was, I cannot fail at this, because my father and my grandfather are both part of this organization. And the last thing I want is people to think that I can't, I can't pull my own weight. So about a week goes by, and at the end of the day, because I'm literally covered in soot and I look like I'm in blackface, I would go over this wash bin at the end of the day and I would scrub up. And I got through with that process, and I turned around one day, and there's 4 guys standing there, big guys. And they say, "Son, you're working too hard." And I couldn't understand what they meant. And they said, "You're working too hard. You're setting standards too high. And if you keep this up, we're going to have a problem." They said, "Just take it easy and we're all going to be okay." And I realized then, what they were speaking the truth. I mean, it was hard work but they were making an obscene amount of money to work in this place. And there was this reality that hit me that I think was much like the institutionalized guy. That's why this story resonated with me, because
Brock.
They were Brock, and I was Andy, I guess, to a certain degree, right? So I'm like, there's no fucking way. I mean, I'll do this for the summer, I'll make my money, but I'm getting the hell out of here. And eventually, by the way, it caused the complete implosion of that company. By the way, that it eventually failed. So I think we have a society though that has
what caused the implosion? Like the unionized?
Well,
like
the union. I mean, these exorbitant wages.
Yeah.
And yet nobody actually working hard.
All right. So it's an incentive problem, as always. Yeah.
Yeah. That I think they had twice as many people as they needed working at this place. And because of the union, they had no way to fire anybody. It also was impossible, to get a promotion. It wasn't a merit-based promotion thing. Like if somebody would retire, let's say, or something would happen and a position would open up, they just gave it based on seniority. They didn't give it based on merit and who was the best. So you just end up with this wildly inefficient organization and people wildly overpaid. But to bring it back to your book and your analogy, I think it's exactly right. And it's a fundamental issue within the society, because we have so many people who have become institutionalized. And I hadn't thought about it before, but you're right. I think in large part all around the world, people working on government payrolls are in that exact same way. They are Brock.
Yeah, indeed they are. And it's so depressing to hear this, because I know so many places today that are exactly the same in fiat land. The unions come and do this. There are minimum wage laws. There are all sorts of interventionist things, and just hourly wages or monthly wages and a steady work week that is, time-based and not result-based is of course, that's all fine if it's voluntary, but most of the cases it's just mandated by some union or by some law that you don't necessarily want to work that way. If I could have chosen how I worked, my last job, for instance, my last Fiat job, I would have just done my tasks as fast as possible and then fucked off and done fuck all for the rest of the week. I am a crocodile when it comes to working. I like to and eat the fucking antelope and then go to sleep for a month. This is much more natural to me, than this relentless letting everything take much more time than it actually takes. I hate that. I used to think I hated laziness, but what I really I don't mind laziness. What I mind is people who don't actually do the shit when they actually do the shit. There's a difference there. People are not result oriented.
Yeah, it's a small percentage of the population that is, and I think those are the successful people. And then what is amazing to me is those people that come from this institutionalized mindset who then want to penalize those that worked hard, that took risk. Because if you look at Elon Musk or Bezos or Zuckerberg, you know, there's all this, they're billionaires and they don't deserve this. But if you look at like Elon Musk, like I work hard, by the way, I do take time for myself. I have some semblance of work-life balance, but I mean, that guy works his ass off. I mean, he running all these different companies, he takes enormous risk. Like him or not, in my mind, you have to respect the work ethic and the accomplishments. And for people to begrudge him whatever he ended up earning, I think is just ridiculous. I mean, we both would be very similar in the way that we look at taxation, right? But to tax that success means that you pay more just seems ridiculous to me. That you work hard and we're more successful just seems ridiculous, unless you look at it from the perspective of the institutionalized person, which is.
Do you think there's a connection between work-life balance and like I need to explain this further, like the thought thread here. So I think most workaholics, I would even say most workaholics become workaholics because their family life doesn't really work 100%. So like if you don't enjoy playing with your children, for instance, like because playing with children can be absolutely mind-numbingly boring because the children are not developed human beings. You can't have a conversation about deep praxeological insights with a 5-year-old. You just can't. So I understand that perfectly. So I think like people who are, especially fathers who are in this situation where the choice becomes either I go and hang out with my family or I focus on my work. And then the choice is, for very many people, the choice becomes obvious because the work is still giving you wife points, if you will. Like it's giving you wife points and life points. You're making sure that your family's long-term survival is taken care of. Like that's your job. You're providing. So, and I'm not placing any judgment here, by the way. I think it's totally fine to be a workaholic. I also think it's totally fine to not be a workaholic. And if you enjoy being with your family, that's all fine and good as long as you can support them. And you don't need to aim for the stars. But I think it explains male behavior and workaholic behavior in particular quite a lot. Like, yeah.
I think in part, so I agree with you for many people. I think what's difficult, I think sometimes though, is there are people that, let's say, make the choice to coach the kids' basketball team, to the kids camping every weekend, to be the ultimate father and husband. And that is, to a great degree, diametrically opposed to great financial success. You can probably be a provider at a certain level and probably provide in the right part of the world. You can do those things and still have a nice standard of living, but you can't be Elon Musk. You know, you can't, you know.
No, there's always a trade-off. Right.
Yeah. I think for certain people, and I think I am this way, and I'm not comparing myself to Elon Musk. I'm just saying I have a trait, I think, that's the same, but I suspect you do too. And that is that
guilty as charged.
Well, not only that we are workaholics, but I don't believe I work for the sake of working and separating myself from my family. I believe what I'm working on has a greater purpose to the world. I'm not trying to make myself more important than I am, but I think and this goes all the way back. I was blessed even back as soon as I got out of school. I was working on, the early days of the personal computer, and I knew it was revolutionary. I knew it would change the world. And I was in a blessed position to be part of that. And, if I was making, I don't know, parts for lights, I could have been an engineer working on light fixtures or something like that. And I wouldn't have, somebody has to do that, and that's important, but it's not, the world doesn't change because we made some minor innovation in light fixtures, but the personal computer changed the world. Bitcoin changes the world. And so once you get involved in something like that, you're in that blessed position to be part of that sort of thing. Like,
I mean, to some people, this might sound pompous, but I think like when you find something worth being passionate about, like something that is truly world changing, and that something that others don't, there's a discrepancy there. Like, if you don't seize that moment, like what are you doing? Like, of course, like, do this, live a life worth dying for. I would want something good to die for, to make it beautiful to live, as the song lyric goes. Like, that's it totally resonates with me.
Yeah. And that, like I said, for me, like, I'm super blessed. Like, I to have been part of the personal computer, like when, like, there was an interesting thing happened in my life. So I mentioned I was working in the brass mill, but I actually started as, I think I was 15 years old, about 1979 is when I started coding. So, and I started actually making money coding around 1979. So I've been doing something related to technology since then. And especially through the mid 80s to the mid 2000s, I worked my ass off. That was 20 years of, traveling all over the world, working really hard, being very passionate about what I did, basically never turning off. Even when I was taking a shower, my head was going a million miles an hour. And then it ended, like in 2004 was when I was done. I left the personal computer industry, and I felt a little lost for a while, because not only did I not have work, but I didn't have any sense of purpose. And while I wasn't a celebrity in the greater sense, like I think I shared something that I think a lot of celebrities go through. So like if you're a rock star, if you're a movie star, if you're an athlete, you have a period of time in which you're shining, right? And maybe you're making a lot of money, but you have this fame, you're in the spotlight. And then when that ends, when your star fades, when you retire, that's when a lot of people, you see suicides, drug abuses, divorces, like all those sort of things fall apart. And I kind of went through that myself, because like imagine how you'd feel, Knut, if tomorrow, for some reason, Bitcoin blew up. Like, it's over. Like, the network failed. It can't be recovered. I'm just a hypothetical, right?
Oh, I thought about that.
How would you feel? And what would you do? Your sense of purpose and and so I went through a version of that in 2004, and I really didn't find my light again. My wife will say this. In fact, she told me, she said, I got involved in Bitcoin in 2017. And she said, the way she phrases it is, she said, my aura had been fading. And she said, and then it burst back. Like, because I had spent a decade-ish kind of just searching for something to try to replace this this position in this industry that really did revolutionize the world. I mean, the personal computer had an impact on society that I think does parallel Bitcoin in a way.
Hello there. I'm Knut Svanholm, and I'm an international village idiot and author. These are my books on Bitcoin. Bitcoin Sovereignty Through Mathematics, Bitcoin Independence Reimagined, Bitcoin Everything Divided by 21 Million, and Bitcoin The Inverse of Clown World. These are now re-edited, redesigned, and available from the Bitcoin Infinity Store. I mean, look at that. Look at how your collection could look. It's upside down, but there they are anyway. But more than that, all of these books will be released for free, chapter by chapter, week by week on Nostr. Also accompanied by a video that Luke and I will make talking about the ideas in the book, where we answer your questions, because you can sign up for the Bitcoin Infinity Academy and join courses for each and every one of the books and talk to us every now and then and get other perks, like a free set of steak knives. So go to the Bitcoin Infinity Store right now, get the books, sign up for the Academy.
The steak knives is only a maybe.
All right then.
And how blessed am I?
Yeah, if I may, like just to answer a thing there, like I think about that a lot, like because there's a non-zero chance that Bitcoin fails. Like that, we just have to admit that to ourselves that is one possible scenario. And what would I do if it did? And the way I see it is that's why I'm doing all of this public stuff and all of this networking and all of this other stuff, and why I wrote a book about praxeology, for instance, not only Bitcoin books. Like, even if Bitcoin dies, you and I will still be friends. Like,
yes, that's true.
And this is true for everyone else I know in the Bitcoin space too, except the posters, I guess.
Yes.
But the real people, they're real, and those connections are real, and then they don't go away. And the biggest insight for me about Bitcoin itself is that was all it was. Like, all along, it was the human connection. Like this thing we call money and the numbers and this and that and the fascinating technology. That's all amazing. But the important part is the people. Like, without that, there's nothing. Like, these are the things. Like, this conversation is equally or much more important than us sending Satoshis back and forth. Like, this is the real connection, and this is the real network, and that's why I'm not worried about it.
I like that perspective. I do. I mean, I have to say, I really hope Bitcoin doesn't fail, but I'm a realist too. And I think we both come from a fairly strong mathematical background, right? And numbers perspective. So
a realism perspective, I'd say. Like I think we're skeptics at heart, both you and I.
Yes, I would agree with that. And so, I believe, I've said this a few times publicly too, but I believe Bitcoin can be money for 1,000 years or more. And
so do I.
But I think there are many threats. Like you said, it's non-zero. And I think cumulatively, these threats, if we look at it on an annual basis, may be very small. It may be a 0.1 or a 0.5% chance in any 1 year of one of these events happening, kind of thing. But if you apply that number to 1,000-year horizon, it becomes very likely, right? That somewhere in that, we don't know the distribution of that. When will that catastrophe hit?
Yeah, and extrapolated into forever, it's inevitable. Like,
yeah, right. Yeah. Now, I believe Bitcoin ends ultimately for a different reason. We could actually talk about that. That might be interesting, but in a more peaceful, good way. But so I believe it, maybe put another way, I think to a certain degree, it is the last money as opposed to it.
By the way, that was the title of Jörg Hermstof's talk that inspired the alchemy chapter in Everything Divided by 21 Million. Describing Bitcoin as an element without mass, an informational element, where the information about the element is the element. Like, so, and he called that talk the last money, and that's where that idea comes from. And I just love that.
Well, wonderful. it's about time for me to go reread some of the books from the beginning, because I've told you, your books were very important to me. They're a huge piece of me being here today and devoting such much of my life to it. They were very seminal in that.
That warms my heart a lot, Bob. Like, I'm coming from you, and it's like,
well, you've played a big role, not just for me, but for a lot of people. And I think, anybody that's seriously come down the rabbit. I mean, there have been important books and publications in the community, and I think, the Bitcoin Standard or these other things, but you don't really, until you've read like your books, until you've done things like really mined Bitcoin. Like I've taken some heat from some people where I've said, until you have actually mined Bitcoin yourself, you don't really understand Bitcoin. You can't get a full grasp. And I've had all kinds of people say, no, I understand Bitcoin. And I don't know how to tell somebody they don't understand Bitcoin. Like, again, I don't want to sound elitist or whatever, but like, I've been doing this a long time myself. I am still learning. Like, the process is not over. I don't have it all figured out yet.
Do you think anyone has, or anyone understands Bitcoin to 100%? Because
No.
I don't. Like, I think there are so many sub-caverns of this rabbit hole that it's absolutely impossible for people. And for the simple reason that no one understands markets. Like, they're dynamic and they are subject to uncertainty. Like, and Bitcoin is all about uncertainty. Like, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And this concept of, I gave a talk a couple of weeks ago. I was in Dallas for BitBlock Boom, and my topic there was called Protecting Bitcoin. And the summary of that conversation, that talk, was that one of the things that troubles me right now is overconfidence, complacency, the Dunning-Kruger effect of so many people. All these things bother me because I think they become attack vectors upon which that non-zero chance could happen. And I'm especially worried that as the next wave of adoption comes in, that the new groups will be less and less motivated to dig deep. Like for me, I think you and I share a similar thing. I am absolutely opposed to ordinals and inscriptions and like those sorts of things. Non-monetary use cases of the network really bother me. Things like ordinals really bother me because it's a false, it creates a false mechanism, a false understanding of the way Bitcoin works.
I have a hard time even calling them ordinals because that's giving them too much credit, and that's somewhat admitting that they are a thing, which in my mind they are not.
Yeah.
Like they require a third-party website to be a thing, so they have nothing to do with Bitcoin.
Yeah. I agree, and I think what it does is it bastardizes like what is a SAT? What does it do? What are its attributes? What's its definition? It bastardizes that. Obviously, you're a person to whom words are very important, and I've become somewhat vigilant in not ignoring when I see people misuse words. And so, like, one of my latest ones is as it pertains to mining. So we look at a company, I'll pick on one right now, Riot. Okay, Riot is not a mining company. They're a hashing company at best.
I love that. Some people don't like that definition, but I subscribe to it 100%.
Yeah. Well, because if you call them a mining company, you are reshaping what mining is. Mining is not about the hashing. Mining is about running a node, making a decision about the mempool, making decisions about the template creation, creating the Coinbase transaction, receiving Coinbase transactions, and hashing. And of those, the least important is the hashing. So,
no, it's like saying the oil company is the car. Like it's the gas company. Like your car runs on gas, but it's not the gas that is. You can't call Enron a car company.
Right.
That's maybe a bad analogy, but
well, I think you're on the right frame of thinking, and I think we have to point out this. I don't know if it's laziness in the way that the vocabulary is being used, or it's just, but what it is like when I say this to people, and like I said, I've been getting a little vigilant about it, and it pisses some people off. But what it says is, on the whole, the vast majority of people do not even know what mining is.
No, and I think the misconception I think it's a mix between malintent and malicious intent and just laziness in defining words and lazy metaphors. For instance, the general public has been told since inception, really, that miners create new bitcoins, and that's the biggest misconception, I think.
I'm really glad you brought that up. I know why you said that, but there's a second reason why that's a really shitty thing to say. So you're saying that, because the bitcoins are already created, right? I think that was the context in which you.
Well, sort of.
That.
Yeah, in a way, but also that then the network, you can't separate one part from the other, and we, the network, which includes the miners, but we, the network, pay miners to produce blocks, newly created coins that we allow miners to give to themselves, and fees. So that's what we permit them to do. And if that breaks down, and all of a sudden the miners can decide for themselves what to pay themselves, or they can decide to take money from someone else to do then the whole game theory of it all breaks down. And Luke Dasher made a great post about this, about like if not at least half of the monetary value in Bitcoin is done by people running their own nodes, then we're in deep trouble, because then it's not doing what it's intended to do. Like the only way to figure out, to detect if someone is printing more of a monetary unit that you're using, is that you are aware of every transaction that's going on and that ever has been going on. Like you need to know and be able to verify every single transaction in that currency, which is why it was so impossible before Bitcoin was invented, or discovered. No one has been able to do that before. Not in gold, not in anything else. You're not aware of how much more of the thing that is being created somewhere else. The only reason that you are in Bitcoin is because you can verify everything from the dawn of time in 2009 to wherever you are on the whatever block height you're at the moment. And if you don't, you're just back to trusting a third party again.
Yeah. You said, I want to highlight something you said, all really good stuff. I completely agree with it, but I want to highlight one thing that you said, just to kind of, for those listening. You accurately described what miners do in the middle of all that. You said miners produce blocks. And so, that's why I am that way. And there are certain words like, what is a SAT? What is a miner? The word ASIC being used to describe a computer or system, like those sorts of things just grate at me, and I'm pushing back as often as I can against them. I think that as we kind of were talking about this, just because of Bitcoin being a non-zero possibility of failure. But I'll say this: it's great because you just said it about 1984. They did it to themselves. Bitcoin has 100% chance of success, in my opinion, if we take care of it properly. or I'll say 99.99999, like that the failure points are all ultimately self-induced. So complacency and comfort are the things that bother me. And, so I've had people, again, when I've been criticized, some people say, well, you're creating FUD, or you're scaring people about something that has a low probability. The network is anti-fragile. It will correct itself. And go, well, no, I don't buy that. I'm sorry. I don't buy that.
Everyone sells FUD, by the way. Like, single thing you can buy is to relieve you of some uncertainty and some problem you have with the future. Like,
yeah,
every single good or service that mankind ever came up with and tried to sell to another human being has a FUD element to it. Like, I buy a sofa because I'm scared that I won't have a sofa to sit on. Like, it's that simple.
Like I said, though, for me, the big thing is complacency. And I think that there's a word that I worry about a little bit, and that's HODL. And I worry about it because I think it perpetuates, you mentioned sofa. I think that perpetuates this attitude that I buy Bitcoin and I go sit on my sofa and for a certain period of time, and then I get wealthy. And it infers kind of a non-participatory attitude. And I think, Bitcoin, going back to what Luke said, Bitcoin more than money is a network, right? And it's a network of people. And so a network that doesn't get used is a network that fails. Like, Metcalfe's law is correct, but it infers participation, right?
Absolutely. May I offer a somewhat different perspective here?
Of course.
I think we have talked about this before, but I'd just like to flesh it out because I think it's important. So during the block size wars, the medium of exchange narrative endangered Bitcoin's long-term survival, because the medium of exchange people who wanted to buy coffee on-chain, they had a very crappy solution that would have eventually compromised decentralization and thereby compromised security and rendered Bitcoin useless in the long run by just making the blocks bigger and hijacking the protocol and letting the miners decide for the network. So all of that was bad. And with the spam issue, it's the other way around. Mechanic talks about this all the time. Yeah. Like if and I've heard Jeff Booth start to adopt this perspective too, that if Bitcoin is not used as a medium of exchange and if people are not running the nodes, then it has the opposite problem. Like, it cannot function as a store of value if you don't have people validating, because then the miners have once again won battleground and they can decide for you what your money is doing. The way I see it is that the dichotomy is completely false. It's not a store of value. It's a medium of exchange over time and space. So you either exchange it you either trade it with other people or with your future self. And once you start seeing it that way and really taking that idea to heart, I think you start viewing Bitcoin completely differently, because you realize that the over time aspect is useless without the over space aspect, and vice versa. Like, you can't have one without the other. So it needs to be both. And anything that makes it medium exchange over space worse, like spam, because it bloats the UTXO set and makes transactions more expensive and makes starting up a new node more expensive, has a potential it's an attack vector. And the same thing with like the block size wars, with people who say that we need big blocks to do transactions. We don't, because there's no demand for the problem is the opposite. People aren't demanding medium exchange over space as much as they should. the fees should be higher. And
Yeah.
like, and here I'd like to pick your brain on one thing. I've heard Peter Todd's talk about like some type of tax, like 2 halvings from now or something, where he wants there to and there's tail emissions and all that crap. Like I view it as like messing with the 21 million cap is obviously a bad idea to me, because you're changing something so fundamental that you will everyone will immediately lose trust in what Bitcoin is if it can change that much, because it's so far then from the original contract. So do you believe there's a danger to that there's an attack vector in miners not being paid enough by the network? Like, do you think that's a thing? I think that the difficulty adjustment sorts that out. It's just that it has always grown, hash rate has always gone up, but the adjustment works the other way around too. Like, so if you get miners running out of business, then new miners come online and it sorts itself out, right?
Okay. First, I want to ask you a question, because I didn't read Peter's thing. Is he basically talking about a tax on a hodl, like he wants to?
Something like that. I don't want to speak for him because I don't know the entire thing.
Yeah, but I think I can answer. I give you my perspective. So
yeah,
regardless,
sure.
I mean, that sounds like a bail-in, like that old Cyprus bail-in thing.
Yeah.
Like, so I'm pretty sure I would be opposed to that, and I don't think it's necessary. I guess fundamentally that's the thing. I don't think it's necessary. I'm still of the opinion that block space will be amazingly scarce going forward. And so that's one point. And the second point is, I believe I think we have to talk about the incentives.
Yeah.
And this will probably be a really good discussion. So let me hit the first thing first. Yeah. Block space, the last 2.5 years, granted, there's been a lot of spam, but we're still, if you look at the last 2.5 years, we're at over 99% block utilization. All the blocks the last 2.5 years, 99% block utilization. So it is, I'm sure you know, 4 million weight units, we're at like 3.92 billion is the average block size over that time.
That's great, right? That's what we want.
That's great.
That's exactly where we want it to be.
Exactly, right? And look at where we are in terms of adoption. You know, we have maybe a couple 100 million of 8 billion people. We have a couple dozen corporations. There's 330 million corporations. My calculation is that, you know, we have somewhere around 200 to 250 million annual transaction capability. That's the base layer. And by the way, you and I are in agreement on that medium of exchange. And I love the way that you express that even as with your future self. Like I love all that. That all fits for me.
That stems from, you can't store value since value is subjective and dynamic. So you can't store it. What you can do is you can send the token into the future.
Yep. And I love that. Now, I think this next thing about incentives though, and so you said you were kind of talking about, I think there's this Nash equilibrium kind of game theory thing around fees and hash rate and all this that kind of brings it all back, right?
Yeah, I have a bit of a rant after this on those things. Yeah.
Okay. So I think that the problem with that, so I'll start by saying I agree with you that I have no concerns about the long-term security of the network. Okay. It will be very viable. It will be very large. I think we have, as a community, oversimplified or simplified the dynamics of this, though, because I believe the incentives. We think about mining as an industry, okay, and kind of a closed industry, all pursuing the fee.
Yeah, somewhat detached from Bitcoin itself.
Somewhat detached from Bitcoin, but also, I think, detached from the greater economy itself too. If we let's just play a little mind exercise. Let's go forward, let's say 20 years. And so now we have a world in which Bitcoin is at least a material part of global settlement. Okay. So nations are trading with final settlement on Bitcoin. Big corporations have it in their treasury. We have this kind of world, right? Well, in that world, and I'll go back to miners produce blocks. Okay. So in that world, if you're Citigroup, if you're Bank of America, if you're Deutsche Bank, and you're a miner, is your financial incentive or your incentive to produce a block, is it to chase the fee, or is it because of the relationship that you have with the sender? So I probably didn't articulate that well, but what I'm saying is that I believe the mining function will have large nation states and financial services companies as the most significant miners in the future. I don't like this, but I believe that.
Can I try it? Like, I think you're expressing that there will be a stronger incentive just securing the network because you're using the network as money. So that becomes an incentive in itself. It's not just grabbing the fees. It's you need this to be secure since your nation is using it, or since you're using the thing, right?
Correct. In fact, I would go so far as to say, like I've given this example. I gave it in a talk recently. I said, if I'm the country of Israel right now, as an example, I looked the stats up. They are 0.5% of the world's GDP. Okay, they're a very controversial country, right? Who their friends and enemies are is probably never clear to them. Okay, and they rightfully probably have a paranoia about that. So my advice, if I had an audience with Netanyahu, I probably have several things to say to him, but one of them would be that I believe if he's interested in the long-term sovereignty of his country, he should not worry about building a strategic Bitcoin reserve right now. That's significantly less important than going out and securing 1/10 or 1/4 of the world's block space control.
Yeah, and dropping capital gains taxes so that we get actual activity as a medium exchange over space.
Well,
right?
That would be good, but bear with me on the block space thing, because if he wants to be sure that what the U.S. and the West did to Russia during the Ukraine war never happens to him, he has to have block space access. Like he has to know. So if I use the number 0.25%, he's going to get 2 or 3 blocks a week that he gets to control that template creation. And he now has ensured the economic sovereignty of his nation.
Kosher blocks.
Oh, that's really good. I hadn't thought of that. Kosher blocks, yeah. But I think every nation in the world should do this. And by the way, I don't want them to do that, but I think that it's the natural course. And on the other side, let's look at an organization like Bank of America. If I'm Bank of America and I want the major corporations and the high net worth individuals of the world to do business with me, my value proposition to them would be, hey, I'm gonna control enough block space that I can give you free access. You know, you get your loans with me, you custody your Bitcoin with me, you do all this stuff with me, and I'm going to give you guaranteed access for free to block space. So, in other words, for the nation state, access to block space is guaranteeing sovereignty. And for the big financial institutions, it is a tool for customer acquisition and retention.
I think we saw an example of this last week.
Interesting. Tell me.
In Tether deciding to start mining with Ocean.
Oh, yes.
So to me, that is like Tether they made a profit that is comparable to a small nation, like $14 billion or something like that.
Yep.
Ridiculous sum. And they decided last week to start mining with Ocean, which is great news. And they're choosing that because they're concerned with the longevity of the network. So it's exactly what we're talking about. Like it is this other incentive to keep Bitcoin decentralized and secure that is actually playing out in real life. You get a real big money player with their, at least for now, their heart in the right place and the right intentions, right? Even though they're dabbling in shitcoins and stuff, they're using all of that economic power to strengthen Bitcoin. And I think that's an ultra bullish signal to me. And about I'd like to address another point you said about probabilities and about like this probability that Bitcoin is destroyed every year and how it compounds and because it's an attack. So I think I hate to use the term the correct way to view Bitcoin, but one very useful way to look at it is that, and to look at it, to define what a Satoshi is and all of that, is to say that everything in Bitcoin is based on plausibility. So the reason you say you own a Bitcoin or that you own a bunch of Satoshis and you own a UTXO, like, is that you control the private key. Now, what does that mean? It means that you know a secret that nobody else knows. And the reason you say that nobody else knows it is that you know that the probability that someone else knows the same key is extremely small because you understand big numbers. But at the end of the day, you don't own it. You just think that it's improbable that someone else will move it until you do. So that's when you acquire a Bitcoin, either if you buy it off an exchange or if you sell the goods or services for it, that's the contract you sign up for. But it's not the only thing in the contract. The other thing is you sign up for 21 million or 2.1 quadrillion sats. But it's still a bet because you bet on the probability that the network as a whole will ever come to consensus on changing that finite supply cap is extremely small. You don't think Peter Todd will win the argument that the Bitcoin will change. You don't think John Cavallo will change it and rename Satoshis into Bitcoin, and all of a sudden there's much more of them. Like, you bet on its longevity as it is. You bet on developers working on upgrades that do not mess with the economic incentives you bet on things like SegWit and Taproot being able to happen without malicious side effects that we figure out later down the line, such as fucking ordinals. But you're also, if you're clever and if you're good at risk management, you also know that we sometimes even that we all agree, even that there's a more than 95% consensus that this is a good idea internally in the network, there's still a risk that it wasn't that good of an idea, that there was a risk involved that no one saw coming, not even Luke.
Correct.
At that point.
Correct.
But you implement it anyway because you have a bigger issue to solve, because there's a scaling issue or this or that issue, or holy shit, this helps the chain anal companies or whatever. Some privacy issue or some scaling issue needs to be solved. So Bitcoin evolves, right? But my point here is that when you acquire the Bitcoin, you take on all of these risks, and which is also like you get Bitcoin at the price you deserve, because the earlier you took on this risk, the more risks there were involved. The longer, the more time that passes, the more lindy Bitcoin becomes, and the less risk there is, because like it evolves and it becomes this robust thing. But it's also interesting because like then you get the ossification debate, and is ossification a good thing? Is it not? The blah blah blah. Point is, we can never know if Bitcoin has ossified, or by definition, it cannot ossify because it's human beings.
That's correct.
The human beings are the nodes. They decide what software to run. It is not a static thing. It is a living thing. It's just that it's a living thing that has such strong incentives and such a strong game theoretical foundation that we think we the owners or the custodians of the Bitcoins before the next generation takes over are so baffled by the beauty of the system and how its incentives are aligned, how it aligns human incentives, so that we are willing to bet that this thing works. And especially if you compare it to fucking fiat, which it doesn't work at all. Like so we find it much more reasonable to have Bitcoin than to have fiat. Now, that's a long rant. I'd love to unpack your thoughts about exactly that.
Well, I loved your rant. I agree with your rant. I think that we're at a point with Bitcoin, as you said, and then there's a certain Lindy effect going on that does reduce the risk. Yeah, comparing the risk of failure of today to the risk of 10 years ago, I believe most people would say it's lower. Although, interestingly, Luke thinks it's higher.
Oh, yeah. But he's always been a bit of a Debbie Downer.
But
that has saved Bitcoin a couple of times.
We need that, and I think I am often the same way. I'm often the downer, and I do think the risks can pivot over time. Like I've talked about this complacency. I don't think the early Bitcoiners' complacency was ever like the reality of the risk was very apparent to the early Bitcoiners, right? And now people walk in, I think, feeling uber confident about it.
Yeah,
This is where, to the point where I think people aren't locking their front door anymore. Like a lot of people come into Bitcoin without thinking, hey, I need to lock my doors. I better have a security system. Maybe I have a gun in my drawer to protect myself if there's an invader too. We've gone to, I'll just leave my front door open because, so
how ironic is it that the guy who wore a literal gas mask during COVID single-handedly saved Bitcoin by being this paranoid, like a couple of times. I just love it. It's like this, there's some poetic beauty to that. Let's talk Bitcoin security. I mean, the first thing you have to do, this is the best practices stuff, right? You have to take your coins off an exchange. Everyone knows that. You have to take custody of your own Bitcoins. Well, that means holding your own private keys. The easiest way to do that is to get a hardware wallet so you can keep your coins offline. And we recommend this little thingy. It's called a Bitbox. You go to bitbox.swiss and use code Infinity for 5% off this thing. It's our favorite hardware wallet. It's very easy to use. It's good on privacy, and it's good for all kinds of other reasons too. And another thing that every Bitcoiner should do is write down their seed phrase. So usually when you fire up a hardware wallet, you get a seed phrase, 12 or 24 words that do not only represent your Bitcoin, they actually are your Bitcoin, these words. The 12 magic words are actually magic. And you could use a pen, but I don't advise people to ever use a pen, because if you use pen and paper and your house burns down or something, that paper is gone forever. For that reason, this thing has been invented many times by many companies. It's a metal seed plate. And this one is from our favorite seed plate manufacturer, Stamp Seed. You get this beautiful hammer and you can stamp your seed into this metal plate. And this particular one, you can do your own design. Here on the backside, this has no design on it, but there's a beautiful everything divided seed plate that you can get. If you use code Infinity, you get 15% off everything on their store. So stampseed.com. Go there and figure out more. And if you want to buy what we call a shit ton of Bitcoin, you should probably secure them in a multi-sig solution of some kind that have more professional custody. And for that, we recommend the bitcoinadvisor.com. This is a bunch of happy Australian people that are more than willing to help you and handhold you into Bitcoin multi-sig custody. One key is held by you, one by them, and one by a third party. And you need 2 out of the 3 keys to unlock your Bitcoin. This is for Bitcoin inheritance and for people who want to buy, a shit ton of Bitcoin. So secure your Bitcoin. Go to Stampseed, go to Bitbox, go to the Bitcoin Advisor, and brush your teeth.
Have I ever talked to you about World War Z, the movie World War Z?
zombie movie with Brad Pitt, right?
Yeah. Not in the same caliber as Shawshank Redemption.
Not quite.
However, there are two great lessons in the movie. Okay. Lesson number one is the 10th man. Okay. And the concept of the 10th man. And the short version of it, I don't want to take too much time on it, but there's a point in the movie where Brad Pitt asks this guy, ironically in Israel, like how did he know that he should protect himself against the zombie attack? And they had built a wall around Jerusalem to protect themselves. And he said, well, it's because of the 10th man. And they have this system within the Israeli Security Council, which I've done a little research on. It kind of exists, where they said if they present a threat to the Security Council and everybody agrees that the threat should be ignored, then one person must take the opposite position and argue why they should take the threat seriously. Okay. So, and there's 10 people on the Security Council, so that's called the 10th man. And so I think Luke is the ultimate 10th man. I try to be a 10th man. I think, you may be a 10th man at times.
I'm a 21st man.
Well, that would work too. The second lesson in the movie is that, spoiler alert for the zombie movie, right? Is that it turns out that the virus that causes the zombie people to go into the zombie condition, it doesn't work on people that are already sick. So like if you have it doesn't want to go to a host that it knows is going to die. Like, so if you have bad cancer or
so
something.
Freddie Mercury wouldn't become a zombie in his latter years.
Yeah. So that became that was the way in which they ended the zombie attack, was basically by they could give people a terrible disease, but they could be like a Ebola or malaria or something like that, and then they give them the antidote a little later.
This sounds like the complete opposite of COVID. Like everyone was healthy and they still became fucking zombies. Like,
yeah,
it's only if you got COVID and you realized it wasn't that bad that you didn't get brainwashed.
So, but the lesson is, I think it's the Achilles heel thing, kind of, right? Or your greatest strength could become your weakness. That's the point. And so with Bitcoin, I think we just have to be cognizant that our success could become our weakness. That it creates that complacency. And again, and even at that, I think if that were to happen, I think the issue is not most likely Bitcoin failing, but Bitcoin not fulfilling its destiny. Are we censorless, borderless, immutable, fungible? Like, we go through kind of those sort of things. Do we maintain all those attributes, or do some of them fade away because the wrong behaviors, the wrong actors, we've let them infiltrate?
Yeah, here I would say I'm not as much a pessimist as Mechanic and Luke seems to be. But as said before, like, they need to be to get to give Ocean attention too. So like, even though I think they are some of the sincerest guys in the entire space, so I do believe they think the threats are real. But I choose to be an optimist, like the Andy Dufresne thing. Like, I don't believe Bitcoin will, like, I do believe we got this. I do believe that in the power of human beings, like figuring things out. Basically, the pen is actually mightier than the sword at the end of the day. So like, argumentation will win and not coercion. Like, I hate to see Bitcoiners simping for politicians and cheering on things like a strategic Bitcoin reserve. I know it's inevitable that this thing is going to happen. Like we've all predicted, nation state game theory stuff. Doesn't mean I have to like it. This is like, it doesn't mean I have to cheer for it. I would much prefer if this took like 10 more years before someone figured some politician figured it all out. I would like it to be among the people and not among the so-called elites.
Yeah.
Like while I enjoy number go up as much as the next guy, I would much more enjoy number of people go up. That's more important to me.
Yeah, same for me. And even at that, I will say that it's still within our control. That I've been promoting like the BitX movement quite a bit.
It's wonderful.
And because I think that the plebs have to take back control a certain percentage of the network. Like, and what I do in my main thing, just for full disclosure for anyone listening, I am on the board at Ocean and an investor in Ocean too. So everybody
and
knows.
Ocean is finding blocks galore. Like it's working. It's fantastic. I'm happy every day because I see this, like, Ocean found a new block. Ocean found a new block. That Twitter handle, it just tracks the new blocks. Like I love it. I love to see it.
Yeah. So it is wonderful. And I think that in those days, in fact, what happened was when we launched, so I was the very first company, my company, Barefoot Mining, was the very first company to put hash rate on Ocean. So it was kind of an honor. And in the very early days, in like November of 2023, I think we only put a little bit on at first, right? I think it was like 20 petahashes at the time. So really small number. And we actually won a block like right at the announcement. Like, it was just amazing. And it was one of my machines, that won it. So, huge honor. That machine, we have a big sticker on it. It has a special place in history.
Yeah.
It was a huge honor to win that. I'm very proud of that. My whole team is really proud of that. Then we won another one.
Do you remember the block height of the first one?
This, for those viewing, this is 819242. And this is Luke made this for me. That's Luke Dasher made this for me in honor of winning that block. So very, very special memento for me. That's a one of a kind. So then we won another one. And then I think we went 18 days without winning another one, something like that. So,
but none of those blocks are the first. Like, there's only one first block.
Right. But it illustrates, though, how hard it is to create a pool, because you end up in this really difficult situation that people don't want to join your pool early on. Many people don't want to join it if they're only economically minded. And they're probably more that hasher mentality.
Well, no. I would say if they're only fiat minded.
There you go.
There's a better way to describe it, like, because if they were actually economically minded, they would realize that Bitcoin needs to keep decentralized in order for it to function at all.
Yeah.
So it's actually worth quite a lot of fiat, if not all the fiat, to make this, to maintain this thing, to make it function forever.
But that is at the core the problem with the large miners, or the large hashers, that their perspective, and I've gotten into some tussles with them in the past, is, well, if there ever is a threat, we can switch, we can move pools, or we could start self-mining, or it's all this stuff. And to me, it's like, well, I gave that example before. They are running organizations with the front door unlocked, no security system, no gun in the cabinet. And they're going to wait until the burglar gets in the house, at which point they think they can suddenly defend against the burglar if the burglar is in their house. It's that sort of mentality.
Yeah. Would a good way of looking at it be to say that this is actually the big game theoretical dilemma with Bitcoin? Like, this is the question, like, can low time preference win over high time preference? Like, will humans make that choice? Or will they, as you say, keep their door open and have no gun and let evil wizards come and take their shit. Like, is that
I
so?
think it does work. Yes, I do think it works, and that's why I hope that they never control too much of the network. But it's also why we go back to that BitX thing where I say, well, hey guys, they're going to exist, whether it's Riot kind of companies with their attitude, or whether it's Bank of America being a mining company. We can't stop them, but what we can do is participate. And that was the point I was trying to make before, even too. When I talk about the HODL attitude, I'm not even in participating. I'm not just talking about using your Bitcoin. I'm talking about participating, like being part of the community and the network. And that could be, running a node. Even if you're at a place where electricity is really expensive, you can run a BitX. It won't cost you anything.
And this is the thing, like, main purpose of like the really basics to run a node is to make sure that the Bitcoin you receive from someone else are real. Like, though the ones you're sending out are real because
they're yours.
That's much easier to know, but you don't know whether you're receiving real ones or not. So that's like the very basics of why you should run a node. But you can still, without making any transactions, you can still be a generational hodler and run the node. And every once in a while, like, ask your Bitcoiner friends if they receive Bitcoin, if they want you to check for them that was real Bitcoin. Like, there are other ways to contribute to the network by running the node than to actually receive transactions all the time. Now, of course, it's better to receive transactions all the time. And I'd say, like, the most important thing here is to accept Bitcoin for your goods and services. That's what I like to promote the most, because that's how you contribute the most. If you work for Bitcoin, you're actually sovereign and you're actually protecting the network. So that's why you should run the node. Care about your own life, for fuck's sake. Like,
right.
Pardon my French, right. But that's
yeah. And you know what you can also do? There's a progression, like especially if there's some newer people out there. Go get a node and run a node. Step 1. Okay, and get comfortable with it. Step 2, go get a BitX and configure it to mine. You can even do it to a pool. I don't even care which one, right? Point it to a pool and do that. Step 3, and this might take a couple months, right? And then step 3, go download Datum, which is a piece of software you shouldn't be able, like if you have a Start9, for instance, or an Umbrel, download Datum, and then start constructing blocks. And now your knowledge level is gonna increase tremendously, your appreciation for the way that the network works. And then when you start creating blocks, you can start doing really cool stuff. You can decide how you want to filter. There's a guy, I just saw a tweet in the last 24 hours, a guy with essentially no hash rate, but running a Datum server, created a template that included his own transaction. So not only did he mine the block, but he had one of his own transactions in the block that he mined. So the reason I point that out is ultimately you make yourself uncensorable. It may be a matter of time, but if you do this, you ultimately reach a point where you will eventually win a block, and you can kind of consolidate with your friends. I believe what's going to happen is we're going to find communities develop around like the BitX community, and there'll be kind of like sub pools, like cooperatives where people agree to include each other's transactions in templates. Like, you and I could be part of a group and we have, 20 other guys, and we may only have 50 petahashes as individuals collectively, but it's enough that, in a certain period of time, we'll win a block, and we can be sure that we're all uncensorable now.
Yeah. But since we're only guessing the 1,000 million times per second, our chances are still low.
Amazingly, yes.
Okay. Bob, from one thing to another, like the very reason that we decided to do this and have you on again, well, you're always welcome, of course. And I think we always have great conversations. And you're one of those guests that I don't mind having on every week if I had to, like, but we had a little thing back and forth on Twitter about whether Bitcoin could work on Mars, or whether Marscoin would inevitably be a shitcoin. And I've had many deep discussions with many great Bitcoiners about this. I know Fractal Encrypt and I disagree, and he thinks that Marscoin didn't have to be a shitcoin. I think it does, because I think Bitcoin is a one. Like if you're aware of Bitcoin, you automatically have insider information when bootstrapping the next thing. So you couldn't really do it again.
Yeah.
And also there's this thing called the hash horizon, which is somewhere between Mars and Earth. And the distance between Mars and Earth differs from like 9 minutes to 21 minutes or something like that.
3 to 22.
3 to 22. Oh, yeah. I stand corrected. So could you sync blocks or not? So, but I'd like to start, and by the way, I did a panel on Madeira. The last panel of the entire conference, Atlantis, was with Dhruv Bansal and Giacomo Socco. And we talked about hash horizons and all sorts of stuff. And Dhruv has written tons about this. And he's an actual astrophysicist, I think, or at least a physicist. So let's start off this debate by a simple question. So I give the question to myself first, and then over to you, all right? So I'll ask myself, can Bitcoin work on Mars? And my answer is not really. So Bob, can Bitcoin work on Mars?
No, it cannot.
This has been the Bitcoin Infinity Show. Thanks for listening.